Hey, Grand Ascension. How's everybody doing? It's me, Nisi. I'm outside enjoying some nature. Sun's coming up behind me. Thought I'd jump on here real quick and do a reading. I see the birds flying around me. They're looking for food. So I have to go in after I read and get some food out here for them. So they'll be good to go. I wanted to get into the next chapter of The Universe Does Not Exist by Kali Richelli. So if you're driving or if you're cleaning, just listen to me read, okay? It's my neighbor Scott with his old school truck, if you hear it in the background. Apologies. All right, this part is called Mystery Surrounding Drones and the Pleiadians. All right, let's get into it. Here's a picture. For those of you who know, you know. Once on land, members of the naval force went to speak with an important figure in the area. I caught a fragment of their words. They mentioned that the radars had detected several drone whispers. I did not know what those were, and because I was not part of that conversation, I could not learn more. The matter remained suspended and unexplained. Later, curiosity won, and I asked Tul El about it. She explained that for some time, there had been growing concern about what was happening in the known continents. And when they say known continents or the known lands, that's what we're in right now. We're inside the known lands within the interior part of the ice walls. Okay. And of course, if you guys know, if you've been following me for a number of months, years, then you know that there is land beyond the ice walls. And this goes back to the video that I reshared. You can go look it up. Admiral Byrd, when he was doing trips to Antarctica, and this is right before the Antarctic Treaty was set up. Okay. So it says, she explained that for some time there had been growing concern about what was happening in the known continents. Apparently several royal custodians and their leaders were returning, at least temporarily, from their travels beyond the Great Dome. In that context, certain drones have been detected that were unusual. This was not common technology. They were custodian devices historically used by very few. Remember a couple of months back, last year, we had a lot of the drone sightings, and quote unquote, the United States couldn't tell us where the drones were coming from, and they were being seen all out through the US. So I'm just going to say, when you know, you know. So it says, some species, however, had gained access to that technology through certain treaties or ancient treaties. Since then, its use had been minimal, nearly non-existent. That was why the detection of these drones in the known lands was so unsettling. It was not something that happened often. Because of this, a silent investigation had begun some time ago with exhausted monitoring. And I understood then that our recent journey had not only been for observation, but also been used to supervise what was happening inside the ice walls near the Antarctic bases on the other side. The suspicions pointed to something even more delicate. It was believed those drones were being sent by the Pleiadians. The revelation stunned me. Why would the Pleiadians send this kind of drone? And how was it possible they possessed custodian technology? Why would the Pleiadians send this type of, why would the Pleiadians send this kind of drone? And how was it possible that they possessed custodian technology? According to 2L, there was a suspicion that for a long time, the Pleiadians had been trying to initiate a massive transfer into the known lands. That possibility created clear tension, especially among the Anakin giants and the ancestrals who held their own plan for the liberation of humanity. The question remained hanging in the air, heavy and uncomfortable. Was it possible that a transfer of the Pleiadian beings was about to take place? And what consequences would that have for the fragile balance that was only just beginning to reveal itself? Chapter 6, year 1729, the beginning of a new era and the birth of humanity without reference, the simulation called The Modern Life. Now, if you know that there's a second book that I'm going to be reading, And we're going to get into it here. So I'm just going to just keep reading, and we're just going to listen to what he has to say. Okay. And then I'll kind of draw my conclusions at the end. Okay. So let's just keep reading. So this is the next part, and I want to show you these pictures. Now, I showed you this before in another one of his books, but I want you to keep in mind when we talk about the incubators and the Cabbage Patch and the clones, how these people, this new phenotype was introduced. Now, I'm not saying that all these people from this new phenotype come from this type of technology, because we know that two albinos can produce an albino offspring or with a lot of inbreeding with certain phenotypes, you can create a new phenotype. All right. I'm just going to say it. So here's the picture, and I want you to check this out and do a screenshot if you have to. Look. You see the ships, and you see this person with the mask over his face? Or that is actually his face, not a mask. Reptilian. Once I was back, I returned to the great library. Play exactly where I want to go. Seeing the first dome so clearly, having time to study it in depth, made me want to understand everything even more. What follows is a part of the notes I found regarding the beginning of new humanity, which may be useful on this path. Okay. Great narratives like to pin dates down as glorious beginnings, new eras, new times, new horizons. But the year 1729 was not a beginning in that sense. It brought no promise. It did not inaugurate progress. What happened then was far subtler, and for that very reason, far deeper. Now, you know, they have to say that the United States was constructed in 1776. I beg to differ, because we were already here. There was already a system in place, a government in place, and there were already ancestrals or ancestors that were running this place. They want to provide the slave narrative that they brought us over on a boat, but that's not true. They actually came over on a boat. It wasn't us. We were already here. Okay. And that's what you all have to understand. And that's why you got to study and you got to do your research so you can come to that understanding. It's not just enough for me to tell you this. You have to know it within your being. Okay. So it says in 1729, a humanity was born without reference. The humanity, which is the new phenotype that was introduced. Okay. And that's just on my theorizing based on all the books and things that I've read, and the fasting and the breath work and the meditation that I have done. Okay. From custodial laboratories, babies emerged at around 7 months. The reset had taken place earlier in 1728. The destruction, the erasure, the violent interruption of continuity had already done its work. Now, when they say that the government was set up here and the Constitution and this country was founded in 1776, it was not. It was reconstructed from the fall of Tartary. Okay. Again, from the custodian laboratories, babies emerged at around 7 months. The reset had taken place earlier in 1728. The destruction, the erasure, the violent interruption of continuity had already done its work. Morphology had already been done, blowing up and flooding places. Wars all around this dome were already in progress. Okay. Millions of autochthonous or melanated people, dark-skinned people were unalived. You have to understand this. All right. So it says, the reset had taken place earlier in 1728. The destruction, the erasure, the violent interruption of continuity had already done its work. But the true change did not consolidate until the following year, when a generation began to exist that had never known anything else. A humanity that could not compare, remember, or contrast, only follow certain orders and look forward. Without reference, there is no conscious rupture. There is no recognizable loss, and therefore no mourning that can even take shape. The new human being was not forced to accept the simulated sky. They received it as nature. They were not persuaded into a lie. They grew up inside it. For them, there was no deception, because there had been no prior alternative, like a vast human zoo. I'm going to say that one more time. There is no recognizable loss, therefore no mourning that can even take shape. The new human being was not forced to accept the simulated sky. They received it as nature. They were not persuaded into a lie. They grew up inside it. For them, there was no deception because there had been no prior alternative, like a vast human zoo. This humanity without reference learned to orient itself through narratives, not through lived experience. Its understanding of the world rested on inherited explanations, not on its own journeys. The environment stopped being something to explore and became something to be described. And so a silent inversion took place. Authority now lived in the dominant story. Knowing no longer meant having seen. Knowing no longer meant having seen. It meant having learned what was supposed to say. The past had been cut away enough that the question was it always like this no longer had meaning. A humanity without reference rarely rebels simply because it does not know what to rebel against, nor does it recognize the cage because it never knew the outside. That is why some believe the system's true triumph was not creating a perfect simulation, but producing a humanity incapable of noticing the difference. Simply because there was no comparison, only a forgotten and experience of a not so distant past that had been completely erased. My grandparents, my great-grandparents, and my great-great-grandparents, my great-great-grandparents, great-great-great, 4 and 3rd and 2nd were just about gone. Okay, they were gone. And then my grandparents grew up knowing their parents, but you got to look at the time frame. This is supposed to be 2026, and I tell you, it's like 1017, 1018, because they added 1,000 years. They had to do this massive reset, and it's perfect the way they did everything, because when you see it for what it is, you begin to put the puzzle pieces together, right? So my point is that they didn't grow up with that experience of the reset. They knew the wars and they knew the hardships that came from the wars, but they were put in this paradigm early on when they were children. So they accepted what they were given. Okay. So that's my point. Okay. So it says, this is why some believe the system's true triumph was not creating a perfect simulation, but producing a humanity incapable of noticing the difference, simply because there was no comparison, only a forgotten experience of a not so distant past that had been completely erased. The Greco-Roman style buildings were built by our ancestors, my ancestors. Okay. And we're given this false sense of history and narrative pushed by these universities that was constructed in 1924 with the Rockefeller system. And if you notice, there were laws that were passed in Virginia about, us as autochthonous people that would not be able to purchase said Slavs or slaves of Christian origin, which would have been the Caucasian or the pale skins. All right. I'm just going to tell you, they did a lot of stuff in the beginning here in these known lands in the 1800s and 1900s, because this is right after the Reconstruction. You got to understand that. All right. Hey, Stephen, how are you? So when you look at the laws that were passed in Virginia, with regards to the censorship, the Census Bureau, the censorship, the laws there in Virginia, reclassifying us from American Indian to Negro to Black to mulatto. They started doing a segregation because after the fall of Tartary, you got to remember, they had to usher in this new phenotype. And this was the Reconstruction. This is when they went in and they started whitewashing history. They started changing everything, and they set up the new paradigm based on this new phenotype that they had now brought in. Okay. And I'm going to show you this picture in a second of what we're dealing with here. Okay. And a lot of you are going to have a hard time with this, but I'm just explaining it to you as simple as possible. And I'm reading Claudio's work. Now, some of his things that he says, I understand and I align with, but Claudio may not agree with everything that I'm saying, and that's fine, because he's in a different avatar body, so he's going to have a different perception than what I have seen, and I've been in this body 57 years or 56 years, right? I have a quote unquote solar return coming up here soon. I was born in the house of Aries. So I'm getting ready to go through this change, right? So let me get back to it. So simply because there was no comparison, only a forgotten experience of a not so distant past that had been completely erased. Again, keep these dates in mind. 1729 was not the year a new story began. It was the year that the previous one was sealed shut for good. It was the previous year that one was shut for good. And with it, the possibility of remembering a different world was sealed as well. Great Tartary was burned forever, and so they tried. I'm going to tell you, those giant buildings that you see at these college campuses and these courthouses and these universities, those were our ancestors' buildings. They were melanated people that were in those buildings, and millions of them were unalived. I'm going to tell you, Tartary fell, and most people don't want to look at it or see it for what it is. And they say, oh, you're reaching and you're stretching. Go do your research. Go do the history. This is where you have to understand that they introduced these new phenotypes as when the Caucasian race was brought into play. Now, there were always Caucasian people here, light-skinned people here, but it was not on the scale that it is now. That is why when you see the pictures and you go look at the videos, you see all the orphans were primarily Caucasian or pale skin or white. We did have some incubator babies that were melanated. Yes, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying on the mass scale with the repopulation event, with the killing of millions of melanated, quote unquote, I'm going to say for this video, black people, and taking out this regime and this government and transferring it into the hands of said Caucasian or white or pale skinned people. This is what you have. All right. Do your research. Not saying you're going to align with everything I'm saying. I'm just telling you. So it says 1729 was not the year a new story began. It was the year the previous one was sealed shut for good. And with it, the possibility of remembering a different world was sealed as well. Great Tartary was burned forever, and so they tried. From then on, each generation inherited a way of seeing that was already shaped. This is why they created the educational system. And it's the same 13 families, the same bloodline families that you see now that's controlling the Committee of 300, the Bilderbergs at the top of the pyramids. This is these organizations and these people that run these organizations like the CIA, the Mossad, the MI6. All of this stuff is interconnected based on this reconstruction that happened with the fall of Tartary. That's my point. From then on, each generation inherited a way of seeing that was already shaped, a gaze trained to accept and not to compare, to repeat by imposition without even recognizing that it was repeating. They have the same MO. It's the same structure they've done over hundreds of years. All right. And it says, and when a humanity is born without reference, the simulation no longer needs defenses. This is who we're dealing with. Take a screenshot. This is the cast of characters, Palantir, Facebook, Logbook, Mark Zuckerberg. These are the entities that we're dealing with. There's 9 different factions within that entity, within that division. And you've got to understand this is what we're dealing with. I'm gonna hold this up one more time. And again, I'm reading from Claudio Nicelli. All these images are from his book. This is for educational purposes. This is for, I don't want to say entertainment, but it's for academic and educational purposes. All right. Now let's get into the next chapter. Chapter 7, the repopulation of the continents, the beginning after the water. Okay. So, there was mud floods, there was fires, there was mythology, there was a lot going on. And this is where we are now. When I began the search into the beginning, I realized I was not dealing with ordinary texts. The records were not arranged by chronology, but by level of access. Some fragments were incomplete. Others were unclear, and they made it difficult to form a coherent understanding of the system's origin. That was when the first block appeared that spoke of after. Not so much of a collapse, a text entitled After the Silence. And its writing there was a pain strong enough to pierce the cold blue screen projected before my eyes. Look. Now you got to understand, when you go to Paris and you go through I forgot the name of that location. Kind of the birds are looking for they're looking for food. They're flying up on the birdhouse. I gotta go get some bird feed. I gotta go in the house and feed these babies. There's millions of bodies that are buried in Paris in the tunnels, and the bones, and especially at the Vatican. And they still pour liquid on those bones because it gives energy. I'm just trying to tell you that the bones that you see all around this world, and where they're unaliving, or they're unearthing bones and giants and things like that. You see the structure. They're unearthing our people, melanated people. Now, I know it's going to make some of you feel uncomfortable when I say this, and, oh, she's blackwashing everything. No, I'm not. You can go look at it. You can go, if you have the eyes to see and you have the discernment and you look at the papers and the text, they tell you what they're doing, and they can tell you who were here first and what the original people look like, and what happened during the structure. I'm telling you, everything has been whitewashed. And they had to do it. I'm telling you, in order for them to get to this point that they're at today, they had to do this. I'm going to flip the camera around. Look at this. Let me see if I can do it without messing up this live. Look. Oh, they flew off as soon as I did it. Can y'all see the birds? Hold on. Another one's going to come back. Look, 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 look. You see it fly down? Look. There's one on the feeder. He's looking for food. You see him? Can y'all see him? And he's on the ground. So I'm having birds fly around my head as I'm reading. So I'm seeing birds fly around. So I wanted to share that with you guys. There's 3 of them on the feeder now. So he said that was when the first block appeared that spoke of after, not so much of the collapse, a text titled After the Silence. And in its writing, there was a pain strong enough to pierce the cold blue screen projected before my eyes. The Great Flood was not described as a myth, nor as a natural accident. It was presented as a terminal phase, cleansing carried out by the parasitic hands, when the prior human continuity could no longer be redirected, according to the colonizers' own text. They wanted to have a hands on the civilization, and so what they did was they created this. Now, most people will have a problem with this, and they say, well, God flooded the planet, this, that, and the other. I'm telling you, there's been multiple resets. This was the last one that he's talking about. Okay. And it says, they spoke of an irreversible interruption. The world was reset without memory. The previous humanity had tried to bring down the pyramids that regulated the power of the reset. Some fell, others did not. And there were those that, after the event, seemed to have been sprouted from the vegetation in the various territories where the floods have been most intense and unexpected, considering the immense technology Great Tartaria possessed at that time among the Anakin and the giant humans. The text agreed on one essential point. Oh man, there's like 6 birds on the ground. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They're all eating the feed. Hold on, look. Can y'all see the birds? Look down at the base of the tree, you guys. Can y'all see that? I don't know if I can zoom in without messing up the live, but there's like 6 birds. 1, 2, 3, 4. See them flying up in the tree? They're getting the feed off the ground. There were 6 birds on the ground. Now there's 3. 1, 2, 3, and there's one on the feeder. Look, you see the 2 flying up? I love it. I love it. Not to get sidetracked. Sorry. I just love seeing the birds. They spoke of an irreversible interruption. The world was reset without memory. The previous humanity had tried to bring down the pyramids that regulated the power of the reset. So there are pyramids on every continent, and America has the most pyramids. We have over 2,000 pyramids here. Don't get it twisted. They always want to show you to the Great Pyramids of Giza. Those are the newest pyramids, okay? The pyramids that regulated the power of the reset. Some fell, others did not. And there were those that, after the event, seemed to have sprouted from the vegetation in the very territories where the floods have been most intense. Unexpected, considering the immense technology Great Tartaria possessed at the time among the Anakin and the giant humans. The texts agree on one essential point. After the water, there was no humanity left capable of reorganizing itself on its own, and so repopulation was not spontaneous. The few survivors fled toward lands beyond what we call Antarctica, the Antarctic Circle, and began again there from zero. And here's a picture of the giant flood. Look. See, in the mountains are giant trees. The document spoke of subterranean installations, yes, protected from the flood, where viable human material had been preserved, not adults, not conscious children, babies of approximately 7 months. Babies of approximately 7 months, kept in advanced biological incubators. They were not called newborns. They were referred to as an adaptable human units for continuity. Adaptable human units for continuity. They were not trying to save individuals. They were restarting the species without reference, just as they had done before. Sorry, I just had to take a break there for a second. That stage was not chosen at random. A 7-month-old baby has no autobiographical memory, but already has a functioning nervous system. It is the exact point where life can continue without carrying history. The texts were explicit. No memory of the previous world could survive, not even in fragments. And the loyal families would help ensure it stayed that way. Loyal families. 13 bloodline families. And if you go back far enough and you look at the house of arms or the coat of arms, you see all the families that are in these bloodlines were all melanated. They do have a whitewashed version or a Caucasian version that they're putting forward now because they had to reconstruct everything. I mean, it's a perfect plan. It's mind-boggling when you know when you know. You see what I'm saying? So, said the loyal families would help ensure it stayed that way. Repopulation was gradual, controlled, distributed across previously selected zones. The lands reappeared as if they had always been there, even though many territories had been prepared before the reset. Basic infrastructure, primary routes, settlement centers. Nothing was presented as reconstruction, though. Everything was presented as origin. So when you see these carvings on the buildings that say I or they say M, they went in and they chiseled them out and they etched them out because they had to add 1,000 years. Alongside those babies, 7 months now keep you because they have a nervous system, but they don't have the memory, right? Alongside those babies, the documents mentioned other human groups that did not retain continuity, the loyal families. They were not numerous. They were not meant to rule visibly. Their function was to guard the transition, to ensure the new humanity grew without access to prior references. This is why they set up the educational system in 1924. Because you had a period of time where it was the Great Silence. You had a period of time where we were still fighting and we were still going through the resets. They were never supposed to mess with us, but they did. Okay? I'm just telling you. They were not meant to rule visibly. Their function was to guard the transition, to ensure the new humanity grew without access to prior references, but within a stable order. They were the initial link between humans and colonizers. Many came to see them as parents, and some even placed them on a higher rung. The loyal families acted as silent intermediaries. They repeated narratives according to a predetermined plan, and in fact, they still do to this very day. Their task back then was to normalize what felt like tradition to new humans was protocol to them. The custodians also appeared in the beginning. They presented themselves as saviors and as instructors, always above the loyal families. The text described their initial role with precision. Teach enough to guarantee survival, but never enough to awaken deep autonomy. Basic agriculture, planting cycles, controlled domestication, and minimal social organization. Knowledge was delivered in fragments, always detached from its prior origin. Humanity did not truly learn again. It was reintroduced. Everything was designed so that the new human would not feel they had lost anything, because no one can miss what they never knew existed. Perhaps that was the reset's true success, among other things we will name in their time. The custodian documents that closed this block ended with a sentence. The mistake of the previous cycles was allowing enough continuity for reference to arise. The PFR, which is the Post-Flood Resettlement System of 1729, corrects that deviation. It was clear this reset was more severe, far stricter, and everything that would come afterward, the sky, the scale, the exhaustion, the noise, the roles we were all later examined, was nothing more than a logical consequence of that act. And these are the people coming off the ships, and these are the people that were going into these, coming out of these locations. Look, take a picture. Now, you guys can say, oh, this is fantastical and this is not, you know, this is a great fantasy and you have no proof, blah, blah, blah. If you look around, you'll see it. You just have to look at you have to really analyze what's going on and why things are the way they are. I mean, I'm not trying to convince anybody of anything. I'm sharing some interesting information. So, the next part is the simulation does not begin in the sky. And this is a picture, I guess, of him. Okay, so let's go to the next part. As I moved deeper into the records, something began to unsettle me. The text no longer felt like it was describing an external system. It felt as though it was observing me reading, as if it knew exactly which part of my mind would try to understand instead of simply seeing. I did not grasp it immediately. It took me a few seconds to accept this sensation. There is a common mistake when imagining projection. Believing technology structure alone is enough to impose a reality, as if the dome were a self-sufficient machine capable of manufacturing an entire world without assistance. But no projection could, however sophisticated, can endure without the most powerful and least understood element of all, the human mind. What do you think they're trying to usher in when they're talking about AI and they're talking about their God and they're talking about worshiping an entity like Baal or Moloch? What do you think that they're doing when they're going around looking for the bones of these previous giants or Nephilim? We have the technology where they can create another body. And we have the technology to transfer consciousness, as you know. What do you think they're doing? What do you think their plan is? I'm just simply saying. It's a repeat of what they've done before. But they're only bringing in these things now. It says the dome does not create a closed reality. It creates a stimulus. It delivers forms, lights, patterns, movement. But meaning, scale, emotion, and certainty do not come from the ceiling. They come from the observer. The mind does not merely look. It interprets, completes, fills in gaps, compares with memories, anticipates explanations, and finally decides almost without noticing that what it sees is real. The simulation depends on the decision. The mind is the glue of the illusion. Where projection is incomplete, it supplies continuity. Where there is ambiguity, it supplies narrative. Where verification is missing, it supplies trust. And it does so automatically, almost involuntarily, because it has been trained to function that way since childhood. That is why the system depends less on technical perfection than on the psychology of the observer. A slightly imperfect sky can persist for generations if the mind has been programmed not to stop and question it. Plausibility is not born only from the detail, but from habit itself. Habit is the true engineering, a constant frame. No, Mimi, get out of there. Mimi, Mia. Get out of there. She's sniffing around where the birds were, where the bird feed is. Habit is a true engineering, a constant frame, a constant language, a constant explanation. Go with daddy. Mia. Okay. Over time, that frame becomes invisible. And when something becomes invisible, it stops being observed. And when it stops being observed, it stops being questioned. You see how they did that? That is where unobserved thoughts enters. Thought, when it is not watched, never rests, and so it fills gaps, anticipates, and remembers. It moves in a continuous inertia that ends up resembling the world in itself without ever pausing to verify. The inner momentum is the continuity the system needs. I thought I understood a little bit more, and the feeling was worse. So the external sky is not separate from what happens within. And I'm looking overhead, and the sky is blue with the clouds, fluffy white clouds. And this is what you see. Everybody says, oh, God created this, God did this, God. To a certain extent, yes. But in all actuality, this world is so much prettier and so much bigger than you could ever imagine. And there are so many different skies and different visuals. In each continent, they're doing something different. Okay, we read that. And I mean, we knew that before I even read it. Everybody doesn't think the same. Everybody doesn't live the same. I'm just telling you. It's Saturnalia Day, Saturday, so I went and got me some Starbucks, and it tastes weird. I don't really drink it as much as I used to. I usually drink my mushroom coffee, but this morning I was up early and I wanted just to get up and read, and I knew I was going to get on here with you guys, and I wanted to have a little bit more of a kick. So I went and grabbed me a coffee, but it tastes weird. I'm going to have to drink my coconut water and my spring water afterwards. So let's read this last part. I'm going to read this again. That is where unobserved thoughts enters. Thoughts, when it is not watched, never rests, and so it fills gaps, anticipates, and remembers. It moves in a continuous inertia that ends up resembling the world itself, without ever pausing to verify. That inner momentum is the continuity the system needs. I thought I understood a little more, and the feeling was worse. So the external sky is not separate from what happens within. They do not seem like two separate phenomena, but mutual reflections that feed each other. Just as the sky is filled with distant images, unreachable, always visible, but never touched, the mind of the new human fills with thoughts that function the same way. Ideas, memories, expectations, projections that appear and disappear without ever truly being inhabited. They shine, they move, they seem profound, but they have no present. Thought creates scenarios never walked through, dialogues that never happen, fears that never arrive, promises always a little further ahead. Real life is pushed into the background, while attention is consumed by that inner sky that never becomes concrete, and that story eventually becomes identity. Projection then becomes a silent pact. And I'm going to show you a picture of our world. False stars, a simulated sky. And this is what it actually looks like. And you can say what you want, but here's the sun, the moon, here's the projection. And look. And here it is right here. And you go beyond this dome, then you got other lands surrounding it. And then you go around another dome and you got further out. You got other lands surrounding that. I'm not telling you to believe anything. I'm telling you to do your research. That's what I'm saying. Chapter 9, progress was redefined as a flash towards the distance. Okay. I walked through the interior of the great library with no clear direction. I would love to go see that place, and I am going to go see it one day. Thinking. Inside, there were no corridors in the traditional sense, no shelves, no aligned volumes. Information was not stored. It was activated by proximity, by intention. I still did not fully understand how. Surfaces responded to movement. Fragments of data appeared and dissolved as I passed. That was when I heard a voice. "What are you looking for?" someone said. I could not tell where it came from. There had been no footsteps, no announcement. He was simply there, walking beside me as if he had always been part of the route and I had only just noticed. He was not looking at the projections ahead. He looked at the space itself, the emptiness, as if following something that was not being shown. I did not answer immediately. "That's what I thought," he said. "Most people come here believing they're looking for information. In reality, they're looking for orientation." He kept walking without looking at me as if he spoke, as if reading my mind. There's something we understood long before they ever named it. In the world you come from, when you are not present, things are not fully things. They behave like possibility, like open trajectories. I stopped for a moment. Some understood it. Too late, he added. Over there, they trapped it in experiments with particles as if secret was in the small. I looked at him for the first time. Then what was it about? Presence. It was about presence, he replied without hesitation. He said that when no one truly observes, when the mind oscillates between past and future, reality does not defend itself. It repeats, it settles, it adjusts. Reality does not defend itself. It repeats, it settles, it adjusts. In that state, the system works perfectly, he added. It doesn't need to correct anything because you aren't fully there. A brief coldness passed through my chest like a sudden breeze. And when someone is present, I asked. He looked at me as if that were the only valid question. Then something collapses, he said. Not outside, inside. And what did not exist appears. See, it's always been about the internal space. If they can keep you away from the internal space, which is the connection with the creator of all, source, nature, the true you, then they can push you to look outwardly and you to get caught up in this world and these material possessions, never tapping into the gift that you were given as a humanity. Okay. The kingdom of heaven is within you. Okay. We're reading and we're learning about some of this covered up history, and we're having these discussions, we're talking, we're intelligently putting things together, but my mind still tells you that this is written within your DNA. All you have to do is tap into it. They were never supposed to do the things that they did in the way that they did them, especially to a certain group of people, but they did. And we are here now. So in order to course correct what was done, you've got to go back within. That's it. There is no other way. They make it complex, but it is brutally simple. He fell silent for a moment as though listening to something behind the air. That is why the present is dangerous, he concluded, because it cannot be simulated, not completely. We kept walking, climbing stairs to levels above that I had not even known existed. The figure had appeared beside me, left my mind turning. Then he introduced himself formally, His name was Ox, and he was also from the ancestral lands. But he had lived for a very long time in the same lands I came from. Something in the way he said it made me understand he did not mean an ordinary stay. Without my asking, during our brief exchange about what I was researching, he mentioned that he had known the Loyal families closely. Not as they are named in official stories, but from inside the real circles of influence. He said that they were not merely symbolic lineages or ancient inheritances, but structures deeply embedded within the organizations that decided humanity's course without ever appearing on the surface, a direct link to the colonizers. He explained that many decisions presented in the known lands as inevitable conflicts, crises, arms, races, redefinitions of progress do not come from the chaos or error, but from the silent agreements, the development of weapons, the constant need for enemies, the obsession with the technological supremacy. These were not flaws of the system, but some of its most stable pillars. He did not speak from resentment or denunciation. He said it in a way where one describes a mechanism that no longer needs to hide in order to function. That was when he began to speak of the greatest deception. He said that in the walled lands, or here in the known lands inside the ice walls, okay, The greatest deception had not been confinement alone, but the redefinition of progress, that the real break came when humans were taught that advancing meant leaving, moving away, looking far, desiring what is not here. Before, he said, progress meant going deeper, understanding the immediate environment, reading the land, becoming more lucid, more skilled, more present. Progress had direction, and that direction was not vertical or distant. It was concrete and it lived. After the reset, the orientation was altered. The new progress manufactured distance. Humans began to move more, produce more, aspire more without understanding their environment. Life became a constant waiting room. The present became a formality. The world became a temporary station. Then he added something even more unsettling. He said that flight had been deliberately tied to power, to the creation of weapons, to ability to dominate the other. Destruction began to present itself as intelligence, control as advancement. And of all of it was celebrated as progress, while understanding quietly vanished from the center. No one seemed to notice. We kept moving without destination. I realized we were not walking toward any specific point. The movement itself felt like an excuse for something else untold to unfold. He also spoke of obsession with the superficial, constant image, permanent stimulus, and all the noise around us, and above all, within as the primary goal. A saturated mind does not observe. If they keep you looking at your phone and keep you looking down, keep you focused on social media, on sporting events, on concerts, on parties, on work, on family functions, on families, if they keep you looking outwardly and keep you focused, you won't ever observe the real truth of what is actually going on in the simulated world. He also spoke of obsession with the superficial, constant image, permanent stimulus, and all the noise around us, and above all, within the primary goal. A saturated mind does not observe. A fragmented mind does not ask. An entertained mind does not connect. I'm going to say that one more time for the people in the back row. A saturated mind does not observe. A fragmented mind does not ask. An entertained mind does not connect. He stopped, and for the first time, he looked directly at me. The system never needed to ban reality, he said. It only had to make it irrelevant. When all value is placed in the distant, the immediate stops mattering. The now is crossed without being inhabited. Life is postponed indefinitely. Before walking on, or perhaps before disappearing, I do not know, he let one last sentence fall without emphasis, almost as if quoting a known rule. There is a question the walled lands cannot afford. He did not say which one, but I assume it had to do with where each person stands in the present. There is a question that the walled lands cannot afford. All right. We're getting through it. I don't know how long I've been on here, but I'm going to take a break. I'm going to let this upload, and then I'm going to come back, and we're going to get into chapter 10, between rituals and forgotten maps. So thank you guys for joining me this morning. Thank you all for listening to me read. And I will be back shortly to continue, because we're going to get through this book. All right. And we're going to do it today. I'll talk to you guys soon. And you know what I always say? Remember what I always say. You be the change you want to see all around this dome, because it's up to you now to make a positive change. I'll see you in a few minutes.